Welcome back to Debut Writers. In this series, we're discussing structuring and writing your book start to finish. This is so much more than just a plot, it's a structure in which events need to happen in your story. Last week, we introduced the beat sheet from the popular Saves the Cat, Writes a Novel. We talked about Act 1, in which you need that opening scene and, most importantly, your theme statement, which is literally a statement that hints at what the main character's arc will be.
And today we're going to be diving into Act Two, or what most authors call the dreaded middle, which it starts at about 20% of your novel. So it's not really into the middle of your book. It starts pretty early and you build up to that middle. And it will take you through about 75% of your novel. In this act, it's important to remember that Act Two is the opposite of Act One. The catalyst that has happened in Act One and then the debate that that character had, it's kind of launched them into this new path, this new world. And now your story is truly beginning, it's truly taking off. So let's dive in to the seven major plot points that make up the middle of your novel.
All right. Kind of makes sense. You hinted at what we left off on last time is the catalyst, the debate. So, really, this next part makes sense in that you break into Act Two. What does that mean?
So that's the moment your character has decided to accept that call to action. That catalyst has happened, they've had to make a decision, which way they're going to go, what are they going to do about it? And now they've made that choice. And so now the story is really kind of moving forward. The character has a goal, he has a path. And so now we're going to kind of go down that path with him. And something that's really important to make sure you do with the break into act two, the next piece of that is that B story. And it's called like the B characters or the helper characters, and which bees are helpers. That's a cute analogy. But it's where like the nemesis or the mentor or the love interest. This is your character, your B character is going to help your main character through that transformation. So your character's in a new world, on a new path, and here comes the new supporting character.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I immediately go to like the love interest, even like the enemies to lovers, like
Mhm.
is introduced at this point and is now going to play an instrumental part in your main character's story and how that looks going forward. That's where my mind immediately goes. But that's not always the case. There can certainly be other types of B story characters.
Yes, and, so, like, the book I'm writing right now, she's very isolated, and so I was having a hard time being like, "Okay, who is this B character?" Who is these characters that are gonna help? And it ended up being the detectives, and now while they're not necessarily the helpers, they are kind of the nemesis towards the end of the book, because they act like they're there to help her and, like, get to the bottom of this murder, but then they accuse her of murder. So it's like these characters kind of like will shift and move. So you don't necessarily have to think of it as like the character that is helping them. It's just a character that is going to really be with them through this new world that is going to force your main character to be pushed into that change, into that transformation. Um, Throughout the middle, that dreaded middle act 2, your character is really kind of just tossing around in their flaws. So, they think they're making right choices, they think they're doing the right thing, and this is the fun and games. This is the next part. So, from about the 20% to 50% until you get to the middle, your character is in fun and games. And it's it's a big part, and it's the new world, it's the consequences. Your characters having highs, your characters having lows. It's kind of like you're pulling your character back and forth. And your character is either succeeding or they're failing at this point. And really this is also that fun and games is where it's that promise of that premise. So that hook of your story, like you're kind of starting to get into that with that fun and games, showing your character's flaw and kind of hinting at the fact that they need to fix it. They need to work it out.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of times, like, taking them even closer and closer to whatever that rock bottom is going to
Mhm.
be in some instances. So, don't always take that so literally, but I think that that's ultimately what we see a lot of the time is that You're emphasizing what their flaws are, where they need to, how they're going to evolve as a character. But a lot of times, in order to do that, they have to hit some sort of rock bottom. But you have some fun and games to get there.
So if you think of like the Hunger Games, she references the author of Save the Cat writes a novel. She references the Hunger Games a lot and love Hunger Games, right? Um, so she, Katniss is kind of thrown into the games now. And there's this back and forth, like she's succeeding and then she's not succeeding. People love her and then they don't love her. And you're kind of like, okay, like where is she going? Like, what's going to happen? So then you kind of get to that middle point where you feel that false victory for your character. And that's about 50% through the novel. It's also kind of considered a second catalyst. It can be a really big, what is that called? Oh, twist. It can
Okay,
be a
plot
really big,
twist? Is that what you're
yeah, plot twist. It can be a real big twist moment, you know? And so it's kind of like, you're building up to that moment where your character finally feels like, okay, I can reach my goal, even with my flaws. I can reach my goal, but she can't or he can't. And so that's that next piece when the bad guys start to close in. So they've had a false victory. So if your main character has been like on the struggle bus, just like having a really hard time, like Katniss was, all of a sudden they seem to be succeeding. They seem to be doing good and things are going better for them. Or if at the beginning of Act 2, you had your character killing it and they're doing awesome, now all of a sudden they are tanking. So the fun and games was kind of the bouncing ball. You're kind of going up and down with the character. You have the midpoint where they're like, yes, success, victory, or defeat. And then it's like, and now we're either going up or down
right. That's a
pretty
point where
steadily.
you hold the book and you're like, this can't be it. There's still so much left because
Yes.
there is.
Yes. Gosh, who is that author? She wrote the book. It's A Letter to My Husband, or some husband letter is in the title. And about halfway through the book, it's the end. And you think, okay, what's the point of this book? It's the who's the author of Pretty Little Lies? Or no, not Pretty Little Lies, Big Little Lies.
Oh, oh my gosh.
I know, right? I'm like
How
totally blanking her name. But but it she wrote this book, A Letter from My Husband or something, and about halfway through, you kind of are like, "Oh, that's the end. Like, what could be left in this story?" I literally
I was just talking to someone about her yesterday, but I was so worried to say it because I was like, am I going to be wrong? Leanne Moriarty. That
Oh,
was,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know, I always worry that I'm, like, butchering her name too. Yeah, I forgot about that.
yeah,
But
very.
she,
I was just talking to someone about her books yesterday.
yes, and I just watched Apple Doesn't Fall,
How is it?
the series. It's good. It's really good.
Okay.
I binged it in, like, a day.
Did you read the book?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
And
I was just
so now I'm like, now I'm gonna go read the book because I really liked the series. It was a good twisty turny novel. Um, but so then it's kind of like I put the book down and then I hate not finishing a book. So I went and I picked it back up and I finished it and wow, it had so much more. And I was so glad I went back to the book. It's been so long now, so the details are lost on me. But I just remember that feeling of thinking like, oh, this book is done. It's over. And then putting it aside. And then when I picked it back up, I was like, oh wow, no, wait, she was just getting started. That was not even the beginning of what this story was going to be about. And now looking back, I'm wondering, I should go back and look at the book and see, did I miss the theme statement? Or was it maybe not there good enough? Because if you've put a good theme statement into your novel, the reader is going to feel this false victory. They're going to know that no, this can't be it for the character. This can't be the moment that they're going to be better, or this can't be how they fall apart, you know? So the next step is when so you have those bad guys closing in, which it
right
doesn't have.
on that note, really quick. When we say guys close in, my mind immediately goes like external bad guys, but can they also be internal?
No, they are internal, and that's actually more
Okay.
important. It's more important that those internal bad guys are closing in. Those flaws are now heightened, and they're really, really preventing the character from reaching what they want, that goal. Because we're about to shift from, you have the 3 points of a character: the problem, which is the
Yep.
flaws, the want, which is the goal they think they want, and then the need, that lesson that they've got to learn, that transformation that they've got to get to. So you're really kind of pushing them from that want to that need phase with the bad guys closing in. And then the end of this, which is all is lost. So with the bad guys closing in and you have that false victory, you're pretty much bad guys closing in should be a quarter of your novel. It's a huge, huge piece of your novel. So sometimes these things like all is lost is a time is like a scene, or the theme statement is a literally like one line. This is a huge chunk of your book. And so much of it really is focused on those internal bad guys. And again, not like, actual bad guys, but the flaws,
I
all
think
the
it's
things
important to clarify
spoiling
though,
your
because
character.
it sounds whenever we say bad guys, because we throw that around like so loosely, at least my mind immediately, I have to like process it and be like, okay, no, like the internal character flaws and what this character is struggling with, not an external bad guy per se.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're really revving this character up for the all is lost moment with the bad guys. Um, if let's say if fun and games was kind of the bouncing ball and then you hit the middle, there's this big twist and now all of a sudden the trajectory is very quick and you're just like sliding down this hill with this character into a pit of alligators and you're like no 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 and of course you like land in the alligators and this is like all is lost and it all is lost you're about 75% through your novels, so you really have put your character through a lot at this point, and all of it's not for naught because all that they learn in act 2 is going to push and progress them into that transformation, right? So as you finally hit that like all is lost moment, that action beat, that rock bottom, this is going to force your character to change, which is the promise you made at the beginning of the book. That theme statement was your promise. Like, look, I promise you, this character is not a total.
You're not reading this for nothing.
She actually uses this word like so many times in the book, but your main character is not a complete douche like you think it is. She's like, he is a douchey douchebag, and you have got to make him a better person.
That's writing at its finest. I love it.
And you've kind of like you've promised that. You've said, look, this character is in this world and it's not going well for them. But if you stick with me, we're gonna get there. We're gonna learn. We're gonna become this better person, right? And so now when you're at the all is lost, you're 75% through your novel. A lot of authors can consider this another catalyst. So even if people aren't using the beat sheet terminology, they use kind of the bell curve where it's like, oh, we're starting and then we're climbing and then the climax and then we're going down.
Yeah.
I remember I'm teaching this course right now on writing, and it's young, it's middle school, and I'm like, so you have been taught the beginning, the middle, and the ending. We're throwing that out the window. Like, that is not how this works.
No.
And so you've had that initial catalyst that kind of propelled you into the story. And so All is Lost is kind of your second catalyst.
Yeah, for no, I think it definitely is because otherwise, like, why would they change? I mean,
Mhm.
you wrote it in the notes too, like in all caps, like do your worst. And I think that that's a really great way, even if you needed to make a note to yourself when you're outlining that section or you're in the midst of writing. I know I kind of make like little notes for myself, not even necessarily like, for example, at the beginning, I was like, this sucks. And like, it doesn't need to be perfect. And you just need to have something on the paper and like now there are words. I saw someone else had done this too and I was like, I'm going to do that, and I start to make notes too. So that can be one where in this second catalyst sort of you are putting like, okay, do your worst, tell yourself to write that out, because ultimately that worst, air quotes, is like a second catalyst to really push the transformation forward. I mean, if we think about that as people and humans too in our real lives, then
Mhm.
that's ultimately a lot of times it is our worst, and that is a catalyst to make us change
I
something.
was just about to say that. I was just about to say
Sorry.
that think of, like, in the as a human, when was the time you changed? What really forced you to change? I mean, you have to make it absolutely impossible for them to reach their goal without changing. Like, that false victory made them feel like, "Okay,
Yeah.
I can do this flaws and all." Well, no, you really can't. And so, you've gotta show them, like, "No, you can't. You really, really do have to get to your absolute worst." And I mean, so think of so many authors that have done this, so many authors that have really just tossed their character face down in the mud, and you're just like, "What? Why? Why is this happening?"
It's to create that emotional response for you. I think also part of it, as much as we're reading it and we think, oh no, don't let that happen, but it's also sort of what makes it more believable too, because you don't expect it to just resolve itself overnight and then all of a sudden they went. Otherwise, we wouldn't read it. If it wasn't making us go on this roller coaster and making us want to follow their story and the ebbs and flows and the victories and the valleys, everything
Mhm.
like that. It's what makes it relatable to that and believable when you're
Yeah.
reading it. Otherwise, you'd be like, nah, this was way too easy. There's no way.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they've been up to this point is your main character has been moving forward, but they still haven't addressed the flaw. And so that's the ultimate problem in the drive, character drive story. So whatever your story idea is, you really that character is driving it forward. So you have to consider, okay, here I am at all is lost. So what's the worst thing that I can do to my character? What is honestly to me like the catalyst that gets the story going is really minimal, compared to this. This is the real catalyst, the real moment
Yeah.
in your book that needs to weigh so incredibly heavy.
Well, the first catalyst is sort of, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily have to be like external, internal, but it's just that first one that forces them to make a decision to go down a path. But this is the catalyst that to me really is their transformation.
Yes. And so if all is lost is the catalyst again, then Dark Night of the Soul, which I was like, some of
Wow.
her names for these beats is just hilarious to
That's
me. But so Dark Night of the Soul is the ultimate debate, that internal debate of can I truly overcome my flaws? And so this is where your character is basically drowning. So you're like, you are just really, you know, you're really getting so dark in this point of the story. It's literally called the darkest hour, the darkest before the dawn. Um, and at this point too, your character can go back to the familiar, the beginning. So they can go back to act one, they can go back to that original world. Um, I forget what it was, Confessions of a Shopaholic. I mean, she ends up, just complete rock bottom, total dead. She goes back to live with her mom, and she's just like, "My life is over. I can't do it. Everything you're like, I totally failed at this." And it's because the flaw is still there. That internal thing she needs to learn, she has not learned. And so this is also too where your B characters can really come out and shine because they are really coming and being brought into the light to kind of help your character progress to this idea of change.
yeah. Okay, question. How long does this part typically last?
So, the Dark Night of the Soul is you're at all at loss, you're about 75% through. And when you break into Act 3, which is closely after this, you are really 80% done with your book. So, Dark Night of the Soul isn't just a split scene, but it's not a meat, it's not a chunk. It's maybe a chapter, maybe
Yeah,
two
so don't have them
chapters.
sit in like a pit of despair for
Which
ever.
coincidentally enough, is totally the problem with a lost woman. She is a dark night of his soul. First of all, she gets there way too quickly, and then she just hangs out there almost the entire novel. I remember I got a review one time. It was my first one-star review. I think we've talked about this, and I felt
Yeah.
like a true author, like, I have made it. I got a one-star review, I can finally say I'm an author, um, which, I think is, something because somebody has read my book and it's not somebody who knows me and they disliked it, right? Which is gonna happen. I think it's like a rite of passage for every
It's
author.
a milestone, and
Yeah.
I say, wear it with a badge of honor.
I do, and this person wrote, "This book was just depressing beginning to end."
Okay, but I know plenty of other books that are that way, like, plenty of other books. So, there is something to be said for the books out there that, I don't know, they made that person feel something, so there's
Yeah.
that.
And she does I mean, there is a character transformation. She does go through this transformation, but now that I'm so familiar with the beat sheet and, like, kind of what that really looks like for a character, I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Well, we skipped these things, and we sat way too long in this one." Like,
She was in a dark, dark spot, and so
it was dark. It was so dark, and
it's
but
well, so it makes me think, though, a little bit, just taking like a different genre and everything. One I was recently reading and just kind of analyzing a little bit as I was reading it for fun, but wanted to have a better understanding too. When the main character in the book I was reading, they reached their dark night of the soul, and kind of this moment, to your point, this was there were multiple points of view in this book once we sort of hit a certain spot, and that was an opportunity where the B character and other characters really started to shine. So we didn't sit so much in this other character's like despair. We saw it, we knew what was going on, but the other characters really came through to help move the story forward in the direction that it was ultimately going to go, to this character's transformation, which, like, she needed to go through a really big one. She didn't have like one thing to resolve, there were a lot of things. So I think that that's like another way to showcase your other characters, your B story.
yes, and your B characters are so incredibly important because I think they're also like if you take her genres, so she does like the 10 Not Your Mama's genres, which are fascinating, by the way. You should, again, so you
Super
should dive
fascinating.
into that one too if you're trying to figure out, okay, what genre am I sitting in? What potentially is my book missing? There's three main things every genre needs to have, and she really dives deep into that through the book, and it's really good. Y'all should check it out. But with that B story, those characters are are there to highlight your main character's flaws. They are there to kind of bring them to light and show that character that they need to get past this. They need to change. They need to be better. So that's why this B story is so incredibly important through your middle. And you will find a lot of people leave it out or they put characters in that aren't really supporting that main character in the way that they need to. So sometimes that may be where you need to look in your book and see, okay, what is that B story doing? How are these characters adding to it? Is it really kind of driving that character to that transformation? Because you've got to think like no matter what genre or what you're doing, you're really kind of propelling that character to that change.
Awesome. What's next then?
So the next thing, so if act two is where you're fixing everything the wrong way, act three is where you're now going to fix it the right way. So in act one, you have the catalyst and the debate that pushes you into this new world, right? So act two, you're in this new world, you're going through all these things with this character. They hit their rock bottom. Here's another catalyst. They're in that debate space again. And now that is going to propel them into act three, where you have the finale, where you have the true change of your character. And that transformation allows the character to be successful. So allows the character to slay that monster, allows the character to win the prize or solve the crime. Like this is where because you have changed, you have transformed, now you can succeed. And
And
so
it's making good on that promise that you
Mhm.
stated in Act One. It's making good on the theme that you introduced, that we know the character is going to go through. The last thing you want to do is introduce a theme and then not bring that to fruition come Act Three.
Yes, totally. So next week we'll dive into Act 3, which again is not really it's you're 80% through your novel. So it's only 20%. So again, Act 2 is the dreaded middle because it is so much of your book. And so, but when you break it down into these 7 major plot points, it can really help you ensure that your middle is progressing and moving along at a good pace, which is what you need for this middle because this is where your reader's going to drop the book and be like, "Nope, I'm done." Like how I was, I'm like, "Nope, I'm done. I don't want to read this anymore."
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, Saves the Cat Writes a Novel does a really good job of, we called it the dreaded middle, but if you do break it down into these seven and make sure that you're addressing all seven, then it kind of breaks it up into chunks for you so that it's not quite as daunting of a task to have to get through. And ultimately, it's going to help move your story forward, which I know we say a lot. I know a lot of other people say it a lot, but we all struggle with it to a point where we're not moving that story forward anymore. And when you follow these beats, these different this outline a little bit, even if you're pantsing it or planting it, they can be really, really helpful. So next week, we'll wrap it up with Act Three. And in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so that you can get helpful tips and other materials that can help you with your debut novel.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Debut Writers. Make sure to check out our newsletter for your 3 T's and subscribe to never miss an empowering conversation.
Stay inspired and keep writing.